When everybody is talking about getting the best quality out of their drone, and to do that you need ND filters, you might ask yourself, are they really as relevant in a drone that is 50, 60, 100 meters up in the sky as they are on a normal camera? Well, let's find out. The whole point of neutral density filters is that you set the exposure correctly so you get the motion blur that we are expected to see. This is how we perceive the world. This is how we have been trained for decades since we were born to expect to see on a screen. You should have a shutter speed that is double your frame rate. So if you film at 24 or 25, your shutter speed should be 1/50th. If you shoot at 30 frames per second, it should be 1/60th, and so on and so on. So that's the way people film, whether it's on digital or film cameras. That's the way people have done it for over 100 years, and that's the way you should always aim to do it, whether it's a teeny weeny DJI Pocket 2 or a drone 100 meters up in the sky. Okay, that's the right way of doing it. The beauty of these ND filters is that once you pop off the cover and you put this ND filter, your weight still is below 250 grams at 249, so you're still safe in terms of regulations. Now, if you have a drone 100 meters up in the sky and you move it slowly forward or backwards, there is very little motion for the drone to be creating motion blur. Okay, so technically, if you do those type of shots, you could possibly get away without using ND filters. Now, the counter argument is, and this is the one that I really believe in, is that by setting the exposure correctly on your drone, the footage doesn't look so over-sharpened, because digital cameras are over-sharpened by nature, way over-sharpened in my opinion. So if you crank up the shutter speed and you make it 1/2000th or 3000th or 4000th of a second, you will get away with having the footage correctly exposed because your shutter is so high up, but your footage will look really, really sharp, okay? And to some extent, it will be annoyingly sharp, okay? Now, you might get away if you have the drone going forward or backwards, but if you do any type of panning or sideways movement, and you have things that move, for instance, if you're filming a bridge, or if you have people, if you have things on the foreground, on the background, that's when you're gonna start noticing things looking odd. They just don't look the way your eyes are expected to see. On the other hand, if you expose correctly your drone using ND filters and you went out and shoot the same thing, you will notice a massive difference, because anything that is in the foreground or background, anything that your drone happens to be flying around will get very nice motion blur, whereas the subject that you're trying to focus will still remain in focus. And that's gonna make a massive difference to the quality of your footage and whether it looks amateur or professional. So ND filters, even if you have a drone 200 meters up in the sky and you break the laws and you try and do something that you shouldn't, which a lot of people do and you potentially have done or tried to do, you should always use ND filters with your drone, no matter the conditions, no matter the altitude, no matter what it is that you're gonna film. It's gonna make your footage look nicer, more professional, and somehow it removes the over-sharpen effect and it gives you a slightly warmer look and feel. So, in my opinion, they're absolutely essential. Now, the same applies to slow-mo. Whether you shoot at 120 or 240 frames per second, your shutter speed should always be double your frame rate. The rules have been the same for over 100 years, and that's for a reason. You should try to stick to those, okay? Now, you need to understand one thing, okay? If your footage looks crap from the word go, crap is crap, okay? No matter how you look at it, it is what it is, okay? So you might find yourself polishing a turd in post. It's not gonna become gold all of a sudden, okay? So try to get your footage looking great from the word go. It's gonna make a massive difference to the quality of your videos. And saying that, when you use ND filters, try to expose to the highlights, even when you're using your drone, okay? Because you can recover the shadows in post, but if your highlights are blown out, that's pure white, you can't recover that. That's baked into the signal, and your footage is gonna look overexposed no matter what you do. As a matter of fact, it's actually gonna look even worse, because you're gonna try to do all sorts of fancy effects, trying to recover information that is not there, and it's gonna look really, really bad. Now, the RC controller will give you a darker image than what it is, so if you're expecting a brighter image, don't suddenly start cranking up the ISO to 400 or 800 because your image doesn't look good, you know. Look at the histogram. The histogram is there for a reason, you know. Pay attention to the histogram, and if the histogram gives you a good reading, you're golden. Now, changing filters when you have a drone 50, 60, 100 meters up in the sky is not as simple as it is when you have a camera, okay? You can't easily access the drone. It means that you need to bring it down, and that might be 5 or 10 minutes, and you're gonna be worrying about battery life. The first thing is you want to make sure that when you take off, you have the right ND. So simply hold the drone up to whatever you're gonna be filming, and then adjust the NDs until you get the correct exposure. Now, lighting conditions change, and you might have an ND 128, and then suddenly the sun gets covered with clouds, and then you need to bump up the ISO, okay? So it happens to everybody. Don't bring the drone down simply because you get a few clouds, okay? So adjust the ISO. You can get away with ISO 200, 400. I think 800 will be the absolute maximum I would go for, because otherwise you start introducing noise. So with that in mind, you have a certain level of flexibility, but always keep an eye on the histogram. That should be the most important feature to pay attention to. And on a day like today, you still need ND filters. You probably need a 16 or even a 32. You'll be surprised, if you do anything outdoors, you need ND filters. You want to have that flexibility, whether you go 100 meters up in the sky and you get some really panoramic wide shots, or whether you bring the drone right up to people or right up to a subject, and you want everything to look nice. So in my opinion, these are the things that you want to start well from the word go. You don't want to be compromising in the quality, and this is so simple. These filters are so small, they literally weigh absolutely nothing, and it's good that you get used to good habits. Just as you need to get used to the rain when you film in this country. Now, Freewell does a set of NDs, hybrid. You get the ND and the polarizer in the same filter. And if I was on a normal camera on the ground, I would say those are really interesting filters, because you can change the polarization and you get rid of reflections, whether it's on water, in windows, anything to do with architecture. They're really important. Now, the problem is that with those filters, you set the polarization at the takeoff. But as you fly, the drone naturally moves and the angle in relation to the sun changes. So theoretically, you should also be changing the polarization. You should be rotating the filter. But obviously, you can't do that because you got the drone 40, 50, 60 meters up in the sky. So it's not like you can reach out and change the polarization. You will find yourself that if you start with an image that looks really nice, the sky looks really blue and the colors are popping. But as you turn around and you go sideways, you pan, suddenly the sky starts to look funny and the dark areas start to go in the middle and then to the other side, and it just doesn't look good. I prefer on a drone to have a clear ND filter that I know at least everything in the image is looking right. And in post, really and truly, to get the colors to pop and to change the color of the sky is really easy. The only time I would personally use a polarizer on a drone is if I'm gonna be doing any architectural filming and I'm gonna be fairly close and I literally have a shot that goes up or down. Nothing that requires moving sideways or rotating, and obviously anything that involves glass and reflecting surfaces, like obviously architecture. I just can't justify it. I prefer to have a straight NDs, and the sets that Freewell has, they're really, really nice. They're actually really nice, very well made, and they weigh absolutely nothing. So in my opinion, it's an absolute no-brainer. The only time I could possibly think that you can get away without using ND filters on a drone is if you plan to take a still out of the footage, because every single frame is gonna look like a still image because the shutter speed is so high up. So it's the only time I could possibly imagine that you can get away without using ND filters. Personally, I will always use ND filters regardless of the altitude or whatever weather conditions, for the simple fact that that is how the footage looks the best, and I don't want to be limited by whether I used or didn't use ND filters. Now, you might ask yourself, what's the point of having a 512, 1000 or 2000 ND as you see in the long exposure filter set from Freewell? Well, those become handy when you do hyperlapses, especially on daytime. Not so much on nighttime, because obviously nighttime is dark, but at daytime, when you have exposures of half a second or longer, that's a lot of light that is hitting the sensor, and your footage is going to be completely blown out. So you need to have those long exposure ND filters so that everything looks really nice.
And also, if you want everything to be really sharp and you don't want any motion blur in your hyperlapse, then you can probably get away with the normal shutter speed, okay, 150, 160, whatever floats your boat. But if you want your, say, cars or people to have motion trails, you need to have long exposure, and that's when those filters come in handy. Now, another plane! It's fucking nuts. It's insane. Plane after plane. I literally have 45 seconds window. Every 45 seconds I've got a plane hovering over my head. So I've got 45 seconds to really deliver the lines. It can be a little bit stressful because you can't really afford any mistakes, otherwise you have to wait a minute and a half for the plane to sort of fly through. And I have everything now going at the same time. I have a boat, I have, oh, look, a bird. I got birds flying, I got pigeons flying, I got a boat with a loo flashing, a boat, wind. I've got someone walking a dog. I expect the dog to be barking any moment now with my luck today. Of course, now I have a helicopter coming. I mean, so what could possibly go wrong now? Oh my God. You have to laugh. You really have to laugh. Otherwise, you'll go insane, you know. I've been sitting in this spot for 45 minutes trying to record 2 lines. And of course, the church bells are going off. Why not? Oh. God give me strength, you know. What could possibly go wrong now? Maybe I should just move out. I had everything kicking off at the same time in that location. Anyway, back to the video. Balogendi filters are not the holy grail. They're just one aspect of a number of best practices and strategies in order to get the best cinematic footage out of your drone. And in that regard, I've got this video here where I show you some simple and easy to implement strategies to get the best and most cinematic footage out of your drone. So click on it and I'll see you there.